Cold, wealthy CEO mocked his maid's looks until he saw her at the pool and lost control. Power means never showing weakness, but Lance's carefully constructed walls were crumbling with every shared glance. Have you ever been blindsided by attraction to someone you thought you knew? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The billionaire who built his empire on never being surprised was about to discover that some shocks can't be bought, sold, or controlled. Lance Whitaker owned half of Miami's coastline, but standing on his penthouse terrace overlooking the infinity pool at his Palm Beach resort, he felt like the king of the entire world. Corporate sharks circled below in their Armani suits, while Miami's elite clinked crystal glasses worth more than most people's monthly rent. He commanded every scene he entered, every conversation he joined, every deal he touched. His live-in maid was supposed to be invisible. That was the point. Aisha Benton kept his 12-bedroom penthouse spotless, his shirts pressed, his coffee perfect. She moved through his world like a shadow, quiet, efficient, unremarkable. When clients visited, Lance barely acknowledged her presence except to find something wrong. Her plain uniforms, her silent movements, even her dark skin seemed to blend into the background furniture. She's practically invisible, he told his assistant Marcus just that morning. Perfect for what I need. But perfection has a way of shattering when you least expect it. The afternoon sun blazed across the resort pool as Lance addressed potential investors from his elevated position. Numbers flowed from his mouth like water. Profit margins, expansion plans, market domination. He was in complete control, exactly where he belonged, when movement in the pool below caught his peripheral vision. Someone was swimming. The woman moved through the water like she was born in it, each stroke cutting through the chlorinated blue with athletic precision. Her form was flawless, shoulders rolling, arms extending, legs kicking with the rhythm of someone who'd spent years perfecting the technique. Lance found himself pausing mid-sentence, his eyes drawn to the graceful figure gliding beneath the surface. When she finally emerged, water cascaded down her body in streams of liquid gold. Her hair, usually hidden beneath a work cap, now slicked back to reveal the elegant line of her neck. The plain uniform was gone, replaced by a simple black swimsuit that showed curves he'd never noticed, muscles he'd never seen, a confidence he'd never witnessed. It was Aisha, their eyes locked across the distance. For the first time in 15 years of building his empire, Lance Whitaker was completely, utterly speechless. The woman he dismissed as furniture, criticized as inadequate, ignored as invisible, stood before him transformed. Not by makeup or expensive clothes, but by her natural element. This wasn't his maid. This was an athlete, a competitor, a force of nature he'd been blind to see. His chest tightened. His carefully prepared speech died in his throat. The investors around him might as well have vanished because suddenly, impossibly, Aisha Benton was the only person in his world. Have you ever been blindsided by attraction to someone you thought you knew? Have you ever looked at a person and realized you've been seeing them wrong the entire time? The problem with assumptions is they make us blind to what's right in front of us. And what Lance was about to discover would shake everything he believed about power, class, and desire. Drop a fire emoji if you've ever completely misjudged someone based on first impressions. She pulled herself from the pool with fluid grace, water droplets catching the Miami sunlight like diamonds on her skin. When she reached for her towel, her movements held the confidence of someone who belonged in this world, not as his employee, but as his equal. The photo was already spreading through the hotel staff's group chat, their untouchable CEO frozen mid-sentence, staring at the maid like she held secrets to his soul. Power means never showing weakness, but Lance's carefully constructed walls were crumbling with every shared glance. By evening, the damage was spreading faster than Miami gossip at a charity gala. The photo showed Lance Whitaker, the man who never lost composure, gaping at his maid like a teenage boy seeing his first crush. His assistant Marcus paced the penthouse office while Lance stared out at the city lights, trying to ignore how that image kept replaying in his mind. "Sir, this could destroy your reputation," Marcus said. waving his phone. The staff is talking. Some are already posting on social media about the untouchable CEO being very touchable after all. Lances Jouknost. He'd built his empire on being feared, respected, never vulnerable. Showing weakness meant losing ground, and losing ground meant losing everything. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw water streaming down her skin, saw those eyes that held depths he'd never bothered to explore. "Where is she now?" he asked. "The spa." Cleaning the lounge after the last massage appointment. The spa lounge sat empty and dim, lit only by the soft glow from the pool area outside. Steam rose from the abandoned jacuzzi while the scent of eucalyptus and lavender hung in the air. Lance found Aisha methodically wiping down marble surfaces, her movements as precise as her swimming strokes had been. When his reflection appeared in the mirror behind her, she didn't flinch. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Whitaker?" Her voice was steady, professional. No hint of embarrassment or apology. If anything, she seemed calmer than he felt. "That photo," he began, stepping closer. "It's causing problems. For you or for me?" The question caught him off guard. She turned to face him, and in the intimate lighting of the spa, he could see details he'd missed before. The strength in her shoulders, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she held herself like someone who'd fought battles he couldn't imagine. "You work for me," he said, but the words lacked their usual authority. "I work in your hotel. There's a difference." She moved to leave, but he stepped in her path. They were close enough now that he could smell her skin. Not the harsh cleaning chemicals he'd expected, but something warm and natural that made his pulse quicken. "Who are you really?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Something flickered in her expression, surprise, maybe, or recognition that he was finally asking the right question. Have you ever felt your power slip away just by being near someone? Have you ever met someone who refused to be intimidated by your status or wealth? Tell me about that moment in the comments below. "You want to know who I really am?" she asked, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Ask your father about the Benton family." The blood in Lance's veins turned to ice. That name, Benton, hit him like a punch to the gut, dragging up memories he'd buried 20 years ago. When she whispered those words, Lance realized this wasn't about a photo or damaged reputation. This was about something much deeper, much more dangerous than attraction. The name that destroyed his family 20 years ago just walked back into his life wearing a Maid's uniform. Lance's hands shook as he pulled out his father's old files from the locked cabinet in his private office. The manila folders felt heavy with secrets, newspaper clippings yellowed with age, but still sharp enough to cut. The Benton name appeared again and again, a ghost he thought was buried forever. The Whitaker Group's aggressive expansion into Atlanta's West End. Low-income families displaced. Promises broken. A community swimming facility demolished to make way for luxury condos that never got built. And at the center of it all, the Benton family, who'd lost everything fighting Lance's father in court. His father had won, legally speaking, but the victory had cost him his reputation, his marriage, and eventually his life. The stress of the lawsuits and negative publicity had triggered the heart attack that killed him 3 years later. Lance remembered being 17, watching the news coverage of families being evicted, including a woman with 3 young children who stood defiantly in front of the cameras. "My daughter was going to be a swimmer," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. That pool was her Olympic training ground. Now what does she have? He'd never seen the woman's face clearly on the grainy news footage. But now, staring at the faded photograph in the newspaper clipping, he recognized those same determined eyes, that same proud posture. Aisha's mother. The knock on his office door came at midnight, soft but insistent. When he opened it, Aisha stood in the hallway wearing a flowing yellow sundress instead of her usual uniform. The transformation was startling. She looked like she belonged in his world, not as his employee, but as someone who could command attention in any room. "You found the files," she said, noticing the scattered papers on his desk. "Your mother, the lawsuit, the swimming facility." His voice was hoarse with realization. "The Cascade Community Pool. My training ground from age 6 to 16. 50-meter lanes, diving boards, the works. I was ranked 3rd in Georgia for the 200-meter freestyle when your father's company tore it down. She walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Miami's glittering skyline. I was supposed to get a scholarship to Georgia Tech full ride, Olympic development program. Instead, I watched bulldozers destroy the only place I'd ever felt truly alive. Lance felt sick. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. Rich boys don't usually track the collateral damage of daddy's business deals. The accusation stung because it was true. He'd been 17, focused on girls and cars, and getting into the right college. The Atlanta project was just another line item in his father's portfolio. When past and present collide, which wins? When you discover your success was built on someone else's shattered dreams, how do you make it right? Share your thoughts on second-generation consequences in the comments. Why are you here? He asked. Working for me, if you know what my family did to yours. She turned from the window, and in the city lights reflecting across her face, he saw something that made his chest tighten with anticipation and dread. Because sometimes the best revenge is making the enemy fall in love with you. She came to his office to settle old scores, but some battles can only be won through surrender. The confession hung between them like a live wire. Lance stared at Aisha, processing her words while his mind raced through every interaction they had over the past 6 months. Every quiet, yes sir, every efficiently cleaned room, every moment she'd seemed invisible. It had all been calculated. Revenge, he repeated slowly. You've been planning this. For 2 years. Finding out you needed a live-in maid was perfect. I could study you, learn your weaknesses, figure out how to hurt you the way your family hurt mine. City lights painted gold streaks across his office windows while she stood silhouetted against Miami's skyline. No longer his employee, but something far more dangerous. His equal in strategy and determination. And now, he asked, stepping closer, now I'm realizing revenge is more complicated when you start seeing the target as human. The admission surprised them both. Lance had expected anger, maybe tears, certainly accusations. Instead, he found honesty that cut deeper than any attack. I was 17, he said quietly. I didn't make those decisions, but you benefited from them. This penthouse, your empire, your reputation, all built on the foundation your father created, including the destruction of my world. She was right, and they both knew it. But standing here in the soft glow of Miami's night lights, with truth finally naked between them, Lance felt something shift. Not guilt, though that was there. Not defensiveness, though his instincts screamed to protect himself. Something deeper. What would make it right? He asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She prepared for denial, for legal threats, for him to fire her and have security escort her out. She hadn't prepared for accountability. I don't know, she admitted. And for the first time since he'd known her, Aisha Benton looked uncertain. The space between them felt charged, like the air before a Miami thunderstorm. Lance found himself moving closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. When he reached up to touch her face, she didn't pull away. I can't undo what my father did, he said, his thumb tracing her cheek. But I could try to build something better. Lance. His name on her lips sounded different now. Not professional distance, but something warm and real. When their mouths met, it wasn't gentle or tentative. It was 20 years of buried anger and fresh desire colliding. Two people who'd been circling each other without knowing it. She pressed him back against the windows, her hands fisting in his shirt while Miami sprawled below them like scattered diamonds. Is it possible to hate someone's legacy but love the person they've become? Can attraction survive the weight of family history? Drop your thoughts below about loving someone despite their past. Her dress hit the floor as city lights painted patterns on their skin. When she whispered his name against his neck, it sounded like forgiveness and challenge combined. As dawn broke over Biscayne Bay, she was gone, leaving only her scent on his shirt and a handwritten note on his desk. Some wars end in surrender. Others just begin. He'd spent his life acquiring what he wanted, but the woman walking away from his penthouse couldn't be bought. Lance had closed billion-dollar deals, negotiated with world leaders, and commanded respect from Miami to Manhattan. But standing in his empty office, holding Aisha's goodbye note, he felt powerless for the first time in his adult life. His assistant Marcus found him 3 hours later, still staring at the handwritten words. "Sir, the Brazilian investors are waiting in the conference room. Cancel it. Sir, cancel everything. I need to go to Atlanta." The flight to Hartsfield-Jackson felt eternal. Lance had his pilot file the flight plan while he researched everything he could find about Aisha Binton. High school swimming records. She'd been phenomenal, breaking state records before the pool closure ended her career. Community college transcripts showing a degree in hospitality management earned while working 2 jobs. A brief marriage that ended in divorce when she was 25. But none of the facts explained why she'd run, or why her absence felt like missing a vital organ. The Cascade community had changed since his father's development company left its mark. Where the swimming facility once stood, there was only an empty lot surrounded by chain-link fence. Weeds pushed through cracked concrete, and graffiti covered the few remaining walls. A sign proclaimed future site of Cascade Gardens, a project that clearly never materialized. He found her there at sunset, sitting on the diving board that still jutted over emptiness. "You followed me," she said without turning around. "You left without giving me a chance to respond." The abandoned community pool reflected nothing but sky and regret, chain-link fences marking the boundary between dreams and reality. When his shadow fell across the water that no longer existed, she finally looked at him. What would you have said? Lance had rehearsed speeches during the flight, apologies, promises, business proposals that could rebuild what was lost. But seeing her here, in the ruins of her childhood dreams, all his prepared words felt inadequate. I want to know who you are when you're not planning revenge or playing maid. I want to know what makes you laugh, what keeps you awake at night, what you dream about when you're not dreaming about getting back at my family. She stood up, facing him across the empty pool. You want to know who I am? I'm someone who lost everything because powerful people make decisions without thinking about consequences. I'm someone who spent 15 years angry and 5 more years planning. I'm someone who discovered that revenge feels hollow when you start caring about your target. The truth hung between them like Miami humidity, thick, inescapable, changing everything. How far would you chase someone who was running from their feelings? Have you ever wanted something you knew you shouldn't want? Share your pursuit stories in the comments. When he kissed her against the chain-link fence, it tasted like regret and possibility. Her hands tangled in his hair, while 15 years of buried dreams mixed with fresh hope. Her younger brother stepped out from behind the building with his phone recording, and Lance realized their private moment was about to become very public again. Going viral was Lance's worst nightmare, until he realized it might be Aisha's greatest fear. Malik put the phone down. Aisha's voice carried the authority of someone who'd raised her younger brother after their mother died. But 17-year-old boys don't always listen to reason. Nah, cease. This is gold. Rich boy chasing you to Atlanta? Following you to mama's old pool? This is about to break the internet. Lance stepped forward, hands raised peacefully. What's it going to take for you to delete that video? Malik laughed, the sound sharp in the evening air. You think everything's for sale, don't you? Just like your daddy. The words hit their mark. Lance flinched, but Aisha moved between them before the situation could explode. Malik, please. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you're kissing the enemy. The same family that destroyed our neighborhood, took mama's dreams, and left us with nothing. Within hours, the video was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Lance Whitaker, Miami billionaire, caught in a passionate moment with his maid in an abandoned pool in Atlanta. The headlines wrote themselves, from penthouse to pool. CEO's secret romance, made in Miami, the ultimate revenge story. When worlds collide, billionaire's Atlanta love affair. But the comment section told a different story. Some called it romantic, others labeled it exploitation. The worst ones focused on race, class, and power in ways that made Lance's stomach turn. Aisha's phone rang constantly. Her siblings, her friends, reporters wanting quotes about the real story behind the relationship. The Atlanta news van parked outside her childhood home looked alien against the cracked sidewalks and weathered porches, reporters treating her neighborhood like a curiosity rather than a community. "I can fix this," Lance told her during a late-night phone call. "I'll make a statement, control the narrative." "You can't fix everything with money and press releases," she replied. Exhaustion cleared her voice. "Some things just have to burn themselves out." But Lance Whitaker hadn't built an empire by letting things burn. The next morning, he stood in front of Miami's business district cameras. No prepared statement, no corporate lawyers whispering in his ear. "Aisha Benton isn't my maid," he said, looking directly into the camera. "She's an intelligent, capable woman who took a job in my hotel because she needed work, not because she was desperate for my attention. Anyone suggesting she's using me or that I'm exploiting her clearly doesn't know either of us." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the punch that would dominate news cycles for weeks. "And if you have a problem with a successful black woman and a white businessman finding connection despite their different backgrounds, that says more about your limitations than our relationship. When a world is watching, do you hide or stand proud? Have you ever had to defend your relationship to people who didn't understand it? Tell me how you'd handle sudden fame in the comments below." Back in Atlanta, Aisha watched the press conference on her phone while her siblings crowded around her kitchen table. When Lance finished speaking, the room fell silent. The envelope slipped under her door that evening contained a single photo. Lance leaving another woman's apartment, time-stamped 3 days ago. Trust built in whispers can be destroyed by a single photograph, even when the picture lies. Aisha stared at the photo until her eyes burned. Lance walking out of a luxury apartment building in Coral Gables, his hair messed up, his shirt slightly wrinkled. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m., just 3 days before he'd followed her to Atlanta, before he'd kissed her at the pool, before he'd defended her on national television. Her hand shook as she dialed his number. "You couldn't even wait a week before going back to your old life?" "Aisha, what are you talking about?" "The photo. Leaving some woman's apartment at 4 in the morning. Was I just entertainment between your regular hookups?" Silence stretched across the phone line, long enough to confirm her worst fears. "Send me the picture," he said finally. "So you can deny it? Make excuses, so I can explain what you're actually looking at." 20 minutes later, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Not from Lance, from a woman whose voice was cultured, elegant, and completely unfamiliar. "Miss Benton, this is Elena Whitaker, Lance's sister. I understand there's been a misunderstanding about a photograph." Aisha's heart stopped. Sister, the apartment building, the late hour, the disheveled appearance. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. "He was at your place?" she whispered. "Having the worst panic attack he's experienced since our father died. He showed up at 2 a.m., barely coherent, talking about you and our father's business in Atlanta and how he was falling in love with someone who had every right to hate him." The words hit Aisha like physical blows. He said that. He was terrified, not of losing his company or his reputation, but of losing you. "I've never seen my brother vulnerable about anything, Miss Benton, but you've changed him completely." That afternoon, Lance's private jet touched down in Atlanta for the second time in a week. But instead of finding Aisha at the abandoned pool, he found her waiting in the lobby of the Four Seasons, dressed in a way that reminded him she belonged in his world as much as he was learning to fit in hers. "Your sister called," she said without preamble. "Elena has always been protective of family." "Is that what I am now? Family?" The question hung between them in the marble lobby while well-dressed guests pretended not to stare at the couple who dominated social media for the past week. "I don't know what we are," Lance admitted. "I just know that when I thought I'd lost your trust, nothing else mattered. Not the company, not my reputation, not the media circus." The Whitaker family estate spread across Coral Gables like a monument to old money. But inside the marble foyer, Lance felt smaller than he had in years as his mother's disapproving gaze assessed the woman beside him. Have you ever been judged by someone's family? Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who'd already decided you weren't good enough? Share your experience in the comments. His mother's parting words followed them to the car. "The board meets tomorrow. Choose wisely, son. Some decisions can't be undone." They wanted him to choose between his empire and his heart. As if love and power couldn't coexist in the same man. The Whitaker Group boardroom stretched like a battlefield. Mahogany table reflecting the faces of 12 men who'd built fortunes on knowing when to cut losses. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, storm clouds gathered over Biscayne Bay, nature reflecting the war about to begin inside. "Lance, we've been patient," said Richard Morrison, the board's longest-serving member. "But this situation with the maid has gone too far. Her name is Aisha. Her name is irrelevant. What matters is the damage to our brand, our reputation, our stock price." Lance looked around the table at faces he'd known since childhood. His father's friends, his mentors, the men who'd helped build the Whitaker empire. Now they sat like judges, demanding he sacrifice the first real connection he'd felt in years. "The stock price is fine. Better than fine, actually. We're up 8% since the story broke." "That won't last," Morrison continued. "The novelty will wear off, and we'll be left with a CEO whose judgment is questioned because he's sleeping with the help." The words hung in the air like poison. Lance felt his control slipping, the careful composure he'd maintained for 15 years cracking under pressure. "Gentlemen, let me be clear. Aisha Benton is not the help. She's an intelligent woman who took a job in our hotel because she needed work. If you can't see the difference, maybe it's time to examine your own biases." "This isn't about bias," snapped Gerald Hoffman, the board's newest and most aggressive member. "It's about leadership. A man who makes emotional decisions instead of logical ones isn't fit to run a billion-dollar company." "Emotional decisions? Like defending someone I care about from public humiliation? Like risking everything your father built for a woman you barely know?" The accusation hit its mark. These men had stood by his father through the Atlanta scandal, the lawsuits, the stress that eventually killed him. They'd helped Lance rebuild what was lost, restore the family reputation, create something bigger and better than before. But none of that mattered when Morrison delivered the killing blow. "We've called for a vote of no confidence, Lance. Unless you end this relationship publicly and permanently, you're out as CEO by Friday." Outside the boardroom, Aisha waited in his office, having arrived for what was supposed to be a quiet dinner together. Through the glass walls, she could see the heated discussion, the sharp gestures, the way Lance's shoulders tensed under pressure she'd helped create. When he finally emerged an hour later, his face told the story before his words could. "They want you gone," she said. "They want me to choose. And what are you going to choose?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Lance had worked 15 years to earn the respect of those men, to prove he was worthy of his father's legacy. Everything he'd built, everything he was, sat on one side of the scale. On the other side was a woman he'd known for 6 months, who'd originally planned to destroy him, who represented everything complicated about power and privilege and second chances. What would you sacrifice for love? What would you never give up? Share your non-negotiables in the comments below. The resignation letter she left wasn't just from the hotel, it was from his life forever. Losing her taught him the difference between winning a business and losing his soul. For 3 days, Lance didn't leave his penthouse. His assistant Marcus fielded calls from reporters, board members, and business partners while Lance sat in his home office, surrounded by legal documents and financial statements, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The board thought they'd won. Morrison had already started making calls about interim leadership. The vultures were circling, competitors who'd love to see Whitaker Group stumble, investors who'd been waiting for weakness to exploit. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed Lance would choose the easy path. On Thursday morning, he walked into the emergency board meeting with a briefcase full of documents and a smile that made every man in the room nervous. "Gentlemen, I've reviewed your vote of no confidence, and I have some interesting news to share." He opened the briefcase and began distributing papers around the table. Financial records, legal documents, investigation reports that made several board members go pale. "It seems some of you have been busy. Gerald, I found your short positions against our stock particularly fascinating. Betting against the company you're supposed to be protecting? Richard, your consulting contract with Meridian Hotels our biggest competitor. Makes for interesting reading. The room erupted in accusations, denials, and legal threats. But Lance wasn't finished. You wanted to remove me because my judgment was compromised? Let's talk about compromised judgment. You've been planning a takeover for months, using my personal life as the excuse to push me out. Unfortunately for you, I learned something important from someone you called the help. He stood, commanding the room with quiet authority. I learned that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who see everything clearly. Aisha noticed things about this company, about our operations, about market opportunities that none of you brilliant businessmen caught. Her insights helped me identify the leak in our Atlanta expansion plans, the source of our labor disputes, and yes, the conspiracy to remove me from my own company. War rooms filled with lawyers and spreadsheets couldn't drown out the silence where our laughter used to be. Each victory felt hollow without her there to share the triumph. But Lance pushed forward, using every lesson she'd taught him about looking beneath the surface, about recognizing worth in unexpected places. By Friday afternoon, 3 board members had resigned. Gerald Hoffman was facing SEC investigation for his illegal trading activities. Richard Morrison was packing his office, his 30-year tenure ended by his own greed. When someone changes you for the better, does that change last even when they're gone? Can love make you stronger even when it breaks your heart? Tell me in the comments about times loss made you fight harder. But winning the corporate war felt meaningless when Lance returned to his empty penthouse. The company was his again, stronger than ever. His reputation was intact, his enemies defeated. The final piece of his plan required the one person he'd lost, and she was already on a plane back to Atlanta. He'd conquered corporate enemies, but winning back the woman he loved would require surrendering the very pride that built his empire. Lance's private jet touched down in Atlanta at sunrise. This time, he hadn't come to chase or convince. He'd come to apologize, and more importantly, to make things right in the only way that mattered. The construction crews were already at work when Aisha arrived at the abandoned pool site that morning. Bulldozers, concrete mixers, and a small army of workers transforming the empty lot that had haunted her dreams for 15 years. She found Lance standing where the old diving board used to be, wearing jeans and work boots instead of his usual designer suits. "What is this?" she asked. "The Viola Benton Aquatic Center," he replied, pulling out architectural plans. 50-meter Olympic standard pool, diving platforms, therapy pools for community rehabilitation programs, and a training facility for competitive swimmers. Her mother's name on a building where her dreams had died. You can't just throw money at this and make it disappear. I'm not trying to make anything disappear. I'm trying to build something that should have existed all along. The plans showed more than just a pool. Community meeting rooms, after-school programs, scholarships for young athletes. Everything that had been destroyed when his father's company demolished the original facility. "This doesn't change what happened," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, it doesn't. Nothing can change that. But maybe it can prevent it from happening to other kids, other families." Lance had spent 3 sleepless nights working with architects, city planners, and community leaders to design something that honored both the past and the future. The construction crews worked through the night, transforming cracked concrete and rusted fences into something that honored dreams deferred and possibilities reborn. "The board meeting," she said suddenly. "You chose the company. I chose both. Turns out I didn't have to pick sides. I just had to be smart enough to see the real enemy." He told her about the conspiracy, the SEC investigation, the corporate restructuring that left him stronger than ever. But more importantly, he told her about the foundation being established, the community investment programs, the scholarship fund that would send kids like she used to be to college on swimming scholarships. "Why?" she asked. "Because you were right. About me, about my family, about the responsibility that comes with power. And because losing you taught me that winning business battles means nothing if you lose your humanity." The afternoon sun reflected off the new pool surface as workers filled it for the first time. Clear, blue water where weeds had grown for 15 years. "What's the grandest gesture someone's made for you?" Have you ever seen someone completely change who they are for love? Share your stories in the comments below. When she finally stepped into the water, it felt like coming home. And when Lance joined her, still fully clothed, it felt like forgiveness. As they broke the surface together, gasping and laughing, neither noticed the photographer hidden in the trees. But this time, the picture would tell a different story. This time, when their photo went viral, they controlled the narrative and the world couldn't look away. The image hit social media at sunset. Lance and Aisha emerging from crystal clear water, her arms around his neck, both of them laughing like teenagers. The caption read simply, "New beginnings at the Viola Benton Aquatic Center. Grand opening spring 2025. But this wasn't some sneaky paparazzi shot. This was strategic, beautiful, and powerful. Marcus had hired the photographer. Lance had approved every angle. And for the first time since their relationship became public, they were telling their own story. The morning show interview was scheduled for Tuesday. Lance sat across from Janet Morrison on Good Morning Miami. Aisha beside him, looking confident in a navy blue dress that made her look like she belonged on magazine covers. So Lance, critics say this aquatic center is just an expensive way to buy forgiveness for your family's past mistakes. How do you respond? Lance's jaw tightened, but Aisha reached over and squeezed his hand, a gesture the cameras caught in America would replay for weeks. Janet, forgiveness isn't something you can buy, Aisha said, her voice steady and clear. It's something you earn through consistent action over time. This center isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a better future for kids who deserve the same opportunities one lost. In your relationship, is this real love or just good publicity? The question hung in the studio air like a challenge. Lance turned to look at Aisha, and something passed between them that made every viewer lean forward. Love isn't a publicity stunt, Lance said, his eyes never leaving Aisha's face. Love is when someone sees all your worst mistakes and still believes you can do better. Love is when you'd rather lose everything than lose them. The interview clip would be shared millions of times. #RealLove trending worldwide. But more importantly, Whitaker Group stock hit an all-time high as investors recognized that Lance's personal growth translated to business innovation. Corporate partnerships flooded in. Nike wanted to sponsor the swimming programs. Coca-Cola offered naming rights to the community center. Even rival hotel chains reached out about joint ventures focused on community development. You did this, Lance told Aisha that night as they reviewed partnership proposals in his penthouse office. We did this together. When you find your person, how do you want to show them to the world? Have you ever had a relationship that made you both better people? Share your power couple stories in the comments below. The celebration dinner at his penthouse was perfect until Aisha's phone rang with a call that changed everything. "Malik's in trouble," she said, her face going pale as she listened. Real trouble, the kind that destroys futures. Lance was already reaching for his jacket before she finished explaining. Her 17-year-old brother had been arrested on drug charges. Charges that carried serious jail time for a black teenager in Georgia, but might disappear for someone with the right connections. The call came during their celebration dinner. Aisha's youngest brother was in trouble, and only Lance's connections could help. Love isn't just about choosing each other. It's about choosing each other's families, problems and all. The Atlanta County Jail looked exactly like what it was. A place where hope went to die. Lance had never been inside a facility like this, but he followed Aisha through the security checkpoints and metal detectors without complaint, his expensive suit drawing stares from guards and visitors alike. Malik sat behind reinforced glass, looking smaller than his 17 years, the orange jumpsuit making him appear fragile instead of threatening. When he saw Lance beside his sister, his expression shifted from shame to suspicion. "You bring your boyfriend to watch me get processed? He's here to help," Aisha said firmly. "Lance has lawyers. I don't want his charity." The pride was familiar. Lance had seen it in Aisha's face dozens of times. The refusal to accept help even when drowning. He understood it now in ways he never had before. "It's not charity," Lance said quietly. "It's family." The word hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Malik studied Lance's face, looking for signs of pity or condescension. Instead, he found something that surprised him: genuine concern. "The drugs weren't mine," Malik said. "But nobody's going to believe that." Lance had made 3 calls during the drive to Atlanta. The best criminal defense attorney in Georgia was already reviewing the case. A private investigator was examining the arrest details, and Lance's own security team was providing protection for Aisha's family, while media attention remained high. But more than legal help, Lance provided something Malik had never experienced from an authority figure: belief. "I know they weren't yours," Lance said. "We're going to prove that." The hospital waiting room 2 days later couldn't contain the tension as 2 families sat together: Whitakers and Bentons, old money and working class, united only by their love for the people who'd brought them there. Malik's case had taken an unexpected turn when he collapsed during questioning, his blood sugar crashing from undiagnosed diabetes. Elena Whitaker sat beside Aisha, both women holding coffee cups like lifelines. "He reminds me of Lance at that age," Elena said quietly. All pride and anger, convinced the world was against him. Was it against Lance, I mean? In some ways. But he had advantages Malik doesn't. Money, connections, skin color. It's not fair, but it's reality. When the doctor finally emerged with good news about Malik's condition, the relief in the room was universal. But it was Lance's reaction that made Aisha's chest tighten with emotion. He hugged her brother like family, whispered something that made Malik nod seriously, and promised to stay until the legal situation was resolved. How do you know someone really loves you? When they love your family despite the complications. Have you ever seen someone prove their commitment through actions instead of words? Share your stories below. That night, as they sat in Malik's hospital room watching him sleep off the medication, Aisha realized something had shifted between them. This wasn't about attraction anymore, or revenge, or even redemption. When her brother opened his eyes and asked if Lance was staying, Aisha realized she'd been waiting for that answer too. He'd planned to ask her at sunset on his yacht, but sometimes the perfect moment chooses you. Lance had been carrying the ring for 3 weeks, waiting for the right time, the perfect setting, the moment that would match the fairy tale their relationship had become in the media. He'd imagined champagne on his yacht, violins playing, Miami skyline providing the backdrop for a proposal worthy of social media. Instead, he found himself dropping to one knee beside a hospital bed in Atlanta, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the smell of antiseptic filling the air. But when Malik opened his eyes and smiled, really smiled, without the anger and suspicion that had defined their relationship, Lance knew this was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Aisha," he said, pulling the small velvet box from his jacket pocket. She turned from adjusting Malik's blanket, her eyes going wide when she saw him kneeling on the linoleum floor. 6 months ago, I thought I knew what power looked like. I thought it meant controlling everything and everyone around me. Then you walked into my world and showed me what real strength actually is." Hospital fluorescents weren't romantic. The beeping machines weren't musical. But when he opened the box to reveal a ring that caught the harsh light and turned it into something beautiful, the sterile room filled with more warmth than any fairy tale setting. "You taught me that real power means lifting other people up. That real strength means admitting when you're wrong. That real love means choosing someone's happiness over your own pride every single day." Malik was pretending to sleep, but Lance could see the smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Elena had arrived 20 minutes earlier with flowers and was now crying silently by the window. Even the nurses had found reasons to linger in the hallway. "Aisha Benton, will you marry me?" She looked down at him. This man who'd followed her to Atlanta multiple times, who'd rebuilt her childhood dreams in concrete and steel, who'd learned to see beyond surfaces and status to find something real. "Are you sure you want to sign up for all this?" she asked, gesturing around the hospital room, toward her sleeping brother, toward all the complications that came with loving her. "I want to sign up for everything. The late-night phone calls about family crises, the hospital visits, the arguments about pride and independence. The way you make me want to be better than I thought I could be." When she said yes, the entire floor erupted in cheers. Nurses, orderlies, other patients' families who'd been following their story. Everyone celebrating two people who'd found something real in a world full of fake connections. What makes a proposal perfect? The setting or the certainty? Have you ever had a moment that was absolutely perfect, even though it happened in the wrong place? Share your thoughts below. The engagement photos they posted later showed both families celebrating together in a hospital room. Malik giving a thumbs up from his bed while wearing Lance's jacket over his hospital gown. The engagement announcement photo showed two families celebrating together, but hidden in the background was a face from Lance's past, someone who thought they'd never see him happy. The past has a way of crashing the party just when you think you've moved beyond it. Victoria Sterling had been perfect on paper, old money, society connections, the kind of woman who looked natural in designer gowns and charity galas. She'd also been Lance's fiancée for 2 years, until she discovered that building an empire required more than trust fund checks and social climbing. Now she stood in his penthouse lobby, her Chanel suit perfectly pressed, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Congratulations on your engagement," she said when Lance stepped off the elevator. "I saw the hospital photos." "How?" "Authentic." Marcus had called ahead to warn him, but seeing Victoria in person brought back memories Lance preferred to keep buried. Their breakup had been brutal, public, and expensive. She tried to take half his company in the settlement, claiming she'd been instrumental in his early success. "What do you want, Victoria?" "To meet her, of course. Your maid-turned-princess. I'm curious what she has that I lacked." The charity gala that night sparkled with Miami's elite, but the most radiant thing in the ballroom was the confidence Aisha wore with her emerald green gown. She moved through conversations with donors and society wives like she'd been born to it, discussing community development programs and educational initiatives with passion that made even the most jaded philanthropists lean in to listen. She belonged here now, not as Lance's guest, but as his equal. "So you're the famous Aisha," Victoria said, appearing beside them during the auction portion of the evening. "I've heard so much about your journey." The word dripped with condescension that made Lance's jaw clench, but Aisha simply smiled. "And you must be Victoria. Lance mentioned you briefly. Something about learning important lessons from past mistakes." The subtle dig hit its mark. Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment before reassembling into practiced charm. "How refreshing to meet someone so direct. I suppose that comes from your background." "My background taught me to recognize real from fake pretty quickly," Aisha replied, her voice honey-sweet but with steel underneath. "It's a useful skill in any environment." The confrontation everyone expected never materialized. Instead, Aisha handled Victoria's passive aggression with grace that made Lance fall in love all over again. By the end of the evening, even Victoria's supporters were gravitating toward Aisha's authentic warmth over manufactured sophistication. But Victoria wasn't finished trying to reclaim what she'd lost. "The board still has concerns," she told Lance during a private moment near the auction display. "Some of us remember when you made better choices about appropriate partnerships. Some of us learned that appropriate isn't the same as authentic," Lance replied. "And that loyalty can't be bought, only earned." How do you handle people from your past who can't accept your growth? Have you ever had to defend your happiness against someone who thought they deserved it more? Share your experiences below. As they danced to their song later that night, Aisha whispered words that would change everything again. "There's something I need to tell you. Something wonderful." The way she said it, with joy and nervousness mixed together, made Lance's heart stop before it started racing with possibility. She dove into his pool as a maid hiding her dreams. She surfaced as his wife, carrying their future. The pregnancy test sat on Lance's bathroom counter like a small miracle. 2 pink lines that represented everything he'd never dared to hope for. A family built on love instead of obligation. Children who would grow up knowing their worth wasn't measured by bank accounts or bloodlines. "Are you sure?" he asked for the 3rd time, his hands shaking as he held Aisha close. 3 tests, 2 doctors, and morning sickness that feels like I'm dying," she laughed. "I'm sure." The Viola Benton Aquatic Center's grand opening was scheduled for a perfect May morning. The community had transformed the space beyond Lance's wildest imagination. Not just a pool, but a hub of activity where kids learned to swim while parents attended job training programs, where teenagers found mentorship and college preparation, where families gathered for celebrations and support. Aisha stood at the podium in a flowing white dress that concealed the small bump just beginning to show. The crowd included everyone who'd been part of their journey: her siblings, his family, the hotel staff who'd watched their relationship grow, the board members who'd finally accepted that Lance's personal happiness translated to professional innovation. 2 years ago, I stood in a different pool, watching bulldozers tear down my dreams, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. I thought that was the end of my story. But sometimes, endings are just new beginnings wearing disguises. Lance watched from the side, his heart full as she continued. This center isn't about replacing what was lost. Nothing can do that. This is about honoring the dreams that survive, the hopes that refuse to die, the belief that every child deserves the chance to discover what they're capable of achieving. When she cut the ribbon, the crowd erupted in cheers. Kids cannonballed into the pool while their parents cried tears of joy. The diving boards that had been absent from the neighborhood for 15 years finally welcomed young bodies learning to fly. But the moment that stopped time was when Aisha turned to Lance and whispered, "Ready to make a splash as a family?" The wedding was held at sunset 3 weeks later, not in some fancy hotel ballroom or society venue, but right there at the aquatic center. String lights reflected off the water, while two communities became one, celebrating love that had transformed not just two people, but everyone around them. Elena served as maid of honor, while Malik, finally cleared of all charges thanks to Lance's legal team and the investigator who'd proven his innocence, walked Aisha down the aisle in place of the mother who would have been proud. "I'm not the kind of man who takes what isn't freely given," Lance said during his vows, echoing words he'd spoken what felt like a lifetime ago. "But I'm the kind of man who will spend every day earning the gift of your love, your trust, and your partnership in building something neither of us could create alone." When Aisha spoke her vows, her hand resting on the slight curve of her stomach, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. "You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when I'd forgotten how to believe in myself. You taught me that love isn't about rescue, it's about recognition. And I promise to keep seeing you, believing in you, and building dreams with you for the rest of our lives." Their first dance as husband and wife took place on a platform built over the pool, water reflecting the lights like scattered stars. As they moved together, Aisha whispered the final piece of news that would complete their story. "It's twins." Lance stopped dancing for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd created together. Not just babies, but a legacy of positive change that would ripple through generations. So what would you do if someone saw your worth before you believe in it yourself? Would you run from that kind of love, or would you build something that lasts? Comment below with what you would have done in their shoes. If this story of seeing beyond the surface moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of love conquering prejudice. Tell me in the comments, who in your life surprised you the most? And remember, the best love stories start when we stop judging and start seeing. Until next time, keep believing in the power of looking deeper.